Hi there. Thanks for joining me today. So today we're going to be discussing just a couple of current events, topics in real estate. First and foremost, has the market turned? So I'm coming to you today from mid-May in 2022, and I am going to say yes. I think the market has shifted just ever so slightly, but I have noticed it. And what I mean by that is, about 2.5 weeks ago, I noticed that not everything fell off the market over the weekend. Not everything that came on the market went under contract. Not every contract that came into our office had 9 competing offers. They'd maybe had 2 or 3 competing offers, but they'd not had 9 or 10 or 24 competing offers. I also noticed that starting that weekend, 2 weekends ago, buyers were not paying $50,000 and $60,000 and $80,000 and $100,000 over asking price. They were paying $20,000 over asking price, $15,000 over asking price. And that is the shift I noticed start to take hold. It obviously has to do with the interest rate, right? The interest rate is climbing. It has gone up nearly 2% points just in like a year. That is a lot. And I'll give you this anecdotal example. I have a listing. It went under contract a month ago. It went under contract the first weekend it was on the market. We had multiple offers. That was expected. We ended up having a low appraisal value, and we were using our buyer, I'm representing the seller, but the buyer was using a VA loan product. Now, we had written in an appraisal gap contingency that the buyer was willing to pay, but the appraisal came in a little below that anyway. So ultimately, my seller decided not to renegotiate, and we put the house back on the market a month after it had gone under contract. That was last weekend. I noticed I was not covered up with showings. I was not receiving multiple offers the first weekend it was back on market. Nothing had changed about this house except that it came back on the market. So there could be maybe some stigma attached to it for coming back on market, but I had been careful to make sure I had indicated in the private remarks that it was a VA loan, and because it was 100% financing, the appraisal had come in a little bit low. And so the buyer was bringing no down payment. So we unfortunately could not make the VA loan work. So I thought I had alleviated perhaps any stigma that might be attached to my back on market status. What really I think is happening, and I had multiple agents tell me this. I had one agent say, okay, my client loves it. She'd like to bring an offer. It will be full price, and we're listed at $210,000. And she called me back and said, unfortunately, Ashley, my buyer called the lender to find out about getting a pre-qual letter, a fresh one, and found out that she now only qualifies to buy a $195,000 house. And that is because of the interest rate change. So if you are a buyer and you could afford a $210,000 house, and now a month later, you can afford a $195,000 house, you are disgruntled. You can't buy as much house. You can't buy a house that is as nice as you could buy a month ago. And alternatively, the clientele for my $210,000 house now just shifted. Now it's the people who were buying a $240,000 house or a $230,000 house. They were shopping for $230,000 houses, and now they can only afford my $210,000 house. They're probably not going to be happy that there is, in their mind, a downgrade in property that they're able to purchase now. Their buying power is now less. So now I'm trying to convince people who were shopping for houses that were bigger than mine that they don't really need all that space. They don't really need a finished basement. They don't really need an unfinished basement. Aren't they okay with mine on a crawl space at 1,100 square feet when they were getting an 1,100 square foot ranch with an unfinished basement? That's a hard pill to swallow as a buyer. If you've been in the market shopping and you know what your money could buy you a month ago, number one, you're not as likely to go way over asking price, right? Because you're already grouchy that you can't buy as much. So you're less willing to pay over list price for a property. And secondly, you may just decide you want to tap out for a little while as a buyer. I had multiple buyers say, you know what, Ashley, pump the brakes. We're just going to take a break. And I don't blame them. They're emotionally overwrought. This has been an exhausting process. They're still not in a house, and now they can buy less house. So this is what I am guessing is starting this little bit of shift in the market that is just slightly, ever so slightly turning it. Now, absolutely, there are still going to be properties that come on the market and get 9 offers because they're going to be highly desirable properties, highly desirable neighborhoods, properties that have been over improved for the price that they're on the market for. There are always going to be exceptions to the rule forever. And there are still going to be more buyers than there are homes for sale because we are still hovering at like just under 400 houses. Not enough houses, y'all. We have, 1/3, 1/4 of the number of houses we had on the market at any given time just 3 years ago. So it's still going to be tight inventory, which is good news for sellers. They just may not be able to make quite as much of a killing on selling their home right now as they could a month ago because the money is more expensive to borrow now. Buyers can buy less house, or they can buy the same amount of house, but their monthly payment is going to be larger. Maybe they were trying to live under budget and now they've got to live at budget or slightly above budget in order to get into the same house. They're not going to make as many liberal decisions about how much to offer for the house if their monthly payment is now dramatically larger than it was going to be a month ago. It's going to take a little while. It's going to take a few months for people to go, okay, well, I mean, we obviously still have to move, so we just have to suck it up. Okay. But for right now, you'll see this little blip where everybody goes, ew, I don't like the feel of this. And they just take a beat. Okay. In my opinion, I've been telling my buyers, that's the perfect time to buy because people have cooled off on the market for a moment. Perhaps you will actually be successful in snapping one up. But that's because I'm eternally an optimist. So are you guys seeing the same thing? Have you noticed changes in the market right this minute? Jennifer, you look at a lot of contracts coming across our desk. What have you noticed, if anything, or have you even had time to come up for air to take a look and notice if we've had fewer contracts, more contracts coming in over the last week and a half or so?
I've definitely seen a shift. We are still getting contracts in, but we are not seeing, like you mentioned earlier, we're not seeing the creativeness of the offers, is what I will say.
Yeah.
Way over asking is not necessarily something I'm seeing a lot of. Here lately, I've seen earnest monies kind of come back down to a normal range as well. But
that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
That, we really beef up those earnest monies when we're in competitive offer situations. And that may come back down a little in an attempt to protect our buyers. You don't want to expose your buyer to having a potential $5,000 loss of earnest money if they just decide they don't want to buy the house. So we had to forego that protection in order to be competitive. But as the market shifts and we don't have to be as competitive, we can dial back some of those strategies we'd had to employ. Yep.
And I say that you're seeing a shift, or I'm seeing a shift. My listing took 14 days to get under contract.
Yep.
Which kind of shocked me because it's a great house.
Right.
But then I've shown 2 houses the past 2 nights, and one house had just whatever time we wanted to go to. Like there was no other competing showings. And then the house last night, we literally had 15-minute time slots. So I don't know if it's just particular home styles that people are looking for. This was 1 level living. So to me, it was just kind of odd because it's the same folks that I was showing. And one, I had tons of times to pick from. And then literally last night we had 15-minute time slots. And my husband was the driver, and he's like, I'm getting the stare down out here. I'm getting the stare down. They're watching me. We had only been there 15 minutes. So
Yep.
that kind of was a shock that was still happening. But I mean, that's my 2 cents there.
No, I appreciate it. So leads me to my next topic. Are price reductions coming? Well, I think they are. I don't think you'll ever see it labeled as price reduction. You'll see price improvement, price adjustment. No one's ever going to say price reduction because it perhaps might create a stigma around the property. So I think those are coming. I have been for 6 months telling seller clients, I'm going to give you my listing price recommendation, but it's good for 2 weeks. And then I want an opportunity to come back in and give you a fresh listing price recommendation. And as a matter of fact, last night I was talking with a seller about what price we want to put his property on the market for. I know the owner of the house next door who also is going to put his on the market. He is a realtor, so he's going to be putting it on himself. So I reached out to him last night and said, hey, I'm thinking about this price for your next door neighbor's house. What do you think? And he actually said, well, I'm going to be at X amount. I think you should bump yours up a little bit because I really do feel like I'm going to get it for mine. Now his has a full finished basement. Mine's on a slab. There are some differences in the homes, but he did convince me that we're going to bump up about 10 grand. Is that a mistake? Maybe. And maybe I'll be one of those price adjustments. It is very difficult right now to fine tune your listing price when we don't know week by week how the market is going to behave. I still come from a place of wanting to slightly underprice and hope the market just bears out a good offer price rather than overpricing and I don't get any offers. Okay. But that is a personal style of mine. I would rather be $5,000 under. If I'm going to price at $305,000, I might price it $299,950 and hope that we end up with multiple offers or hope we end up with somebody who wants to bring above asking. I was not doing that a few years ago, because it was normal for houses to stay on the market for 4 or 5 months before they sold. So my listing price strategy was different back then. So I've had to evolve. I've had to change and tweak how I do my listing price recommendations and my listing price strategies. There is no right answer. Again, this is all just personal style and how I tend to then roll out my marketing in relation to that listing price recommendation. But I do think price adjustments are coming. When are we going to get back to buyers being able to ask for closing costs? I don't know, because appraisals are still an issue and appraisals are going to continue to be an issue. So as exemplified by my example earlier of us getting a low appraisal on a VA 100% loan, there are appraisal pitfalls for government loans. I will always still accept government-backed loans. I think they're great products. I think they allow entry into the market for folks who do not have large down payments saved up. I think they are an excellent tool for our veterans to be able to leverage themselves into a home without having to have a large savings account or without having to tap into their large savings account. So I will always champion the government-backed loans. However, when I work for the seller, it's my job to explain to them the accommodations that have to be made for government-backed loans. And the primary one is the appraisal. So appraisers are coming out to assess the property and make sure that it's going to be suitable for those buyers, for the protection of those buyers. So I will tell you about a property I know that's on the market that has a accessory dwelling, but it hasn't been finished out. Now there's wiring, there's plumbing, but it's not been finished. If my buyer is going to go into that with a government-backed loan, and an FHA or a VA appraiser is going to go out. I'm going to recommend to that seller through the listing agent that they cap all those things. They don't need to look like a defect. They need to look like, well, this was all prepped, and at the purchaser's option later, the new homeowner's option later, they could finish this work, but it is not going to be construed by the appraiser as a defect that needs to be corrected. So that is going to be, as a listing agent, what I'm looking out for. And when I go to list a house, I'm listing a house on Friday. I went out and I took a perimeter walk all around the inside and the outside of the property. And I recommended to them that they scrape and repaint the parging on the foundation around their house. There is a lot of peeling paint on the parging, the little stucco coating around the foundation on that house. That is not going to pass a government-backed loan appraiser. And the way I tell my seller is this: I get you want to sell your house as is, I do. But if you can address these 3 items I found, we'll be able to open up the pool of buyers. We can expand that out and have more buyers viable for making an offer on your house. So could you please scrape, collect the paint chips, because this house is older than 1978, dispose of them properly, and repaint those areas where the paint is peeling off of the foundation parging? Do they want to do that? Probably not. I wouldn't want to do that. And as a seller in this market, people are probably telling you, oh, you don't have to do anything. Just sling it on the market and it flies off the shelves. My point as their representative is, but why would we want to have to make that a job of a professional painter or a contractor later when you can do it yourself now for the cost of paint and some time, in order for us to be able to accept a government-backed loan product and know we're going to go through the appraisal process unscathed? Plus, if the appraiser comes out and they note some items that need to be corrected, the appraiser has to have a revisit fee that is charged to the buyer, $150, $300. I don't know. It could be either of those. Any price the appraiser charges for a reinspect fee. They've got to come back out and verify those things have been done. Well, now you've unnecessarily charged the buyer, as the seller, an extra $150, $300 for a reinspect fee. And now the seller is having to pay a contractor to come out and correct that painting on the parging on the foundation. So as a listing agent, I am looking over that property and just looking for peeling, chipping paint, handrails that may be needed on basement stairs or patio stairs. I'm looking for things that I think perhaps an appraiser might come up with. Those are the 2 biggies. Those are the ones that I know are going to come up. So those are the ones I always have my sellers correct. These folks were great about it. These folks said, sure, we can take care of that. Sometimes my sellers are not as happy to take care of those types of things. So it's my job to persuade them why it's in their best interest to open it up to the biggest pool of buyers possible. You have no idea when a buyer's walking through a property with their buyer's agent, the buyer's agent goes, you know what, this isn't going to pass your FHA appraisal. You're going to have a reinspect fee from the appraiser. The seller may not do it, and then you'll have to do it. That may be just enough for the buyer to go, not worth it. Let's go look at something else. So I'm certainly not going to let that get in the way of us getting a government-backed loan offer. Okay, other appraisal pitfalls is the appraisal gap. So in the example I gave earlier, we knew we were selling at market value. A month ago, we sold at market value. We sold above the list price. That is what is called market value, because that is what the market is willing to bear. So we did accept a VA loan product, because again, I've told you, I have nothing against those loan products. I think they're excellent products for the buyer. This is their limitation, is appraisal value. So it must appraise for at or above purchase price, or the buyer is allowed to terminate. And they have to be allowed to terminate because they won't be able to come to closing. This is the VA product they were using was a 100% loan product. That meant they had no down payment to bring. So as part of our counter offer, we said, sure, we're happy to give it to you. And we love the price. Thanks so much. But I want you to recognize that nothing else in this area has comped that high. There have not been any sold comparatives to justify this price. So we may run the risk of an appraisal issue. Now, in a different type of market, I would have never suggested something like we might get a low appraisal, because then that might put blood in the water that I didn't know how to price it right, and there may be over offering on this house. But we also never had anything sell over list price before. So different market, different strategies. So now I have no problem saying to the buyer's agent, well, how are we going to handle a potential appraisal gap? You know, you have said you'll buy it for $300,000. What if the appraisal comes in at $292,000? Is your buyer willing to bring cash to cover some amount of appraisal shortfall? And then we wrote that into the contract. So let's say the buyer says, okay, I'm willing to cover up to $8,000 in appraisal gap. That means on a $300,000 purchase price, if the appraisal comes in at $292,000, the buyer is going to bring an extra $8,000 to closing in addition to their closing costs. And we're going to keep moving to closing. But if that appraisal comes in at $291,000, the buyer has a termination right. Okay. So appraisal gap is going to be another pitfall when it comes to this market, and especially government-backed loans or any loan that is a 100% loan product or a 95% loan product. Anything where you are borrowing close to the purchase price, your appraisal is going to have to be higher. Okay. Okay, let me open it up to questions you guys may have about any of that. Okay.
I'm just going to go on the record saying that to back up on your comments about buyers closing cost, I think that's going to be a thing of the past for right now. I don't see that swinging back around. I have an appraiser friend. I think I've talked about her a lot before, but they have never understood how many contracts. They never understood the concept of the seller paying the buyer's closing cost in this area. I know they worked in the Virginia Beach area before, and she's like, Jennifer, that's just not normal. That's just not normal. So I really think that now buyers have seen that they can do it. Sellers have seen that they can do it. So I think that's going to take a while to swing back around for them to start contributing to that again.
Yes, I have always had heartburn over it, because you're asking these poor appraisers to go out and say the house is worth $6,000 more than you and the listing agent have agreed it's worth. So buyer, seller, listing agent, and buyer's agent have all agreed it's worth $300,000. But because the buyer wants to build $6,000 into their closing costs, we're now saying, hey, appraiser, pretty please say it's worth $306,000. What? I mean, I've always had heartburn on that. It has always been odd to me. And if we get to the point where buyers pay their own buyer's agents and sellers pay the listing agent, we've got to figure out how buyers are going to pay for that as well, and I think it's going to come from where lenders are going to have to decide that people can borrow more than what they're borrowing now. So if they're going to do a 10% down payment, great, but they can build in something else. Lenders are going to have to, if lenders still want to make loans, they're going to have to realize that that buyers may not have down payment, closing costs, and their buyer's agent's commission. That may just be too much cash on hand for a buyer to have. We'll just see how it all works out. I will still be here. I will still be selling houses. So ultimately, I never worry too hard about these things. The number of times I've had to get creative or reinvent, that's just what you got to do. Yep. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.